I call the Tuesday, May 28, 2019 work session meeting of the Portsmouth City Council to order. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Battle.
Here.
Mr. Clark.
Here.
Mr. Glover. Mrs. Lucasberg. Here. Mr. Moody.
Here.
Ms. Simmons. Here. Mayor Ruff.
Here. And Dr. Patton's on a well-deserved vacation. And we applaud that. And Mr. Solomon Ashby, are you going to take the agenda, or Mr. Baldwin?
No, Mr. Baldwin is going to take the agenda there.
Thank you, and good evening, Mayor Rowe, members of council. For your work session tonight, we have 3 presentations that are scheduled for you. The first one up is the 2019 legislative report, and Sherry Neal, the city's manager of intergovernmental affairs, will provide an update on the 2019 legislative initiatives. She's also going to present a timeline for the 2020 legislative packages. Sherry.
Good evening,
Evening.
Good evening.
Mayor Rowe, Vice Mayor Lucasberg, members of council. I am pleased to be before you this evening to present to you the outcomes of the city's 2019 statewide regional public policy initiatives and the city's 2019 legislative initiative packages. Following my presentation, our city attorney, Mr. Ashby, will share with you several notable 2019 Virginia General Assembly legislative highlights. At the completion of his presentation, I'll return to the podium to provide you with the timeline for the development and adoption of the city's 2020 legislative initiatives. So the city's 2019 state legislative initiatives contain several regional, statewide, and public policy initiatives which council took positions on. It also contained 5 legislative requests and 1 budget amendment request. So if council would provide me would indulge me. Well, I went the wrong way. Deborah, what'd I do? I haven't been here for a while, y'all, so forgive me. What am I doing?
You did more than that.
I did more than that? Okay. If council will, thank you. Forgive me. But if council would indulge me for a few moments, I would really like to elaborate on that number 1 initiative. And I would like to elaborate on that for several reasons. First is because I personally worked extremely hard on this, and I'm very proud of the outcome. And secondly, it was led by Portsmouth's team. It was led by myself. It was led by our delegation members and working in conjunction with our delegation members. So for years prior to my coming to the city of Portsmouth, there's always been an attempt to try to address the pilot fees for the port, to no avail. Even to 2000, when former Senator Quayle passed the 2000 legislation that was never funded. When I began with the first 2004 legislative package, it was in there. For 15 years, we've been trying to go after that in various forms, to no avail. So a few years ago, and working with different strategies that we came up with internally with our engineering department, our economic development department, and a couple of years ago, we went forward again trying to get pilot fees, but when we realized to no avail that it wasn't going anywhere, I came up with a different strategy. Working in conjunction with my counterparts in the other host cities of the port, the pilot, Delegate James, we were able to get the Speaker of the House, Cox, to put together a work group of the stakeholders, which included the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, the Port Authority, the host cities of the port, and the economic development personnel from each of the host cities to come together to try to identify what could be done for the host cities of the port. Out of that, in this last legislative session, and it was an uphill battle, and we fought very hard on it, we got $1 million put into the state budget, specifically for the host cities of the port. We are creating a completely new program. It's called the Port Host Communities Revitalization Fund. And though $1 million may not sound like a lot, it's a huge start, it's a huge accomplishment, and once we are proved that this is something that's going to be good not only for the state but for the whole cities of the port. We can always go back to have more monies put into that particular fund. So that was huge, and it was an uphill battle, but we did achieve it. So currently, we're working on this. We're putting the program together, and we're working to get it implemented and the funding starting to flow latter part of this year. So I just wanted to share that with you guys. That was huge. Thank you. Also listed here are the other items of interest to the city. Our bridge loan was approved again in the governor's budget. Of course, the casino gaming was a big one. Those bills passed. The study is due out in December of this year. We supported the school facility modernization that passed. Dedicated funding for transit and HRT that somewhat passed. We did get some funding for operations, I believe. Higher speed rail service, there was no action taken on that. And of course, the widening of the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, we were looking for the state to help put in some money for the maintenance that had been deferred on the trestles for some years, so it wouldn't come out of the HR TAC money. And that was also guaranteed. I'm going which way with this? This way? Thank you. Moving forward with our initiatives, I'm not going to go through each one, but you can see it for yourself, which ones were budgeted, which ones failed, like the decriminalization of marijuana, that bill failed. We got increased funding for K-12 education and for the Virginia Housing Trust Fund. We received increased funding for the local stormwater assistance funding, the water quality improvement fund, kinship guardian assistance program. This one is huge. When this was first put into place, the rules and regulations that came down initially to implement this was saying that the child had to be taken from the family and placed in foster care before a kin could come and try to apply to take the child and take care of it so they could get services, which no other state was implementing it that way. So we went back and we had it revised and changed. So the rules have been changed, so now that the next of kin can apply to take the child and get services through social services for it. And of course, funding assistance for recurrent flooding and sea level rise, especially dealing with our military facilities. No action was taken on that piece. Moving forward to our legislative package, the 5 legislative initiatives that the city had. The first one was regarding the, addressing the required minimum rates for recycling. And just as a reminder, that came out of the fact that China is no longer accepting plastics from the United States. And they've also lowered the rate of contamination that can be included in the plastics. Therefore, when it comes to processing them, unless the DEQ changes, Department of Environmental Quality changes its rate, most of the plastics is going to wind up in our landfills. So we put that forward, and out of that we were able to get a letter sent to the Secretaries of Commerce and Labor and Natural Resources requiring that they review the matter and take it into consideration. We were informed during General Assembly session that DEQ was already moving in this direction, so there was no need for the legislation, but they would support our concept to make sure that it was included. On the next piece, relating to the felony drug distribution and TANF, our Directress of Social Services is a gem, and the City of Portsmouth should really, really, really recognize that. This woman worked extremely hard with me to try to push this initiative forward, along with Delegate James, and we worked hard. We were complimented, I don't know how many times, about the fact that we were able to push this matter further than anyone else has pushed it. Unfortunately, due to the politics of the session, we didn't get it through. However, we've been pretty much told that if the balance of power does shift at the General Assembly after the elections in 2020, it is well worth us taking this back up there again, because we can probably get it through. Even the Department of Social Services, even though they were not able to come out and fully endorse what we were doing, they did support by giving testimony that substantiated why this needed to be changed. And just back for your recollection again, another reason we took that forward is that right now Virginia is only one of 5 states that still has a full ban. And it's also one of 10 that still has a full ban on TANF, and The other one in 5, is a full ban on SNAP. So we really need to address that matter. The next one that we took forward was to provide information to detainees in our local and regional jails, their voting rights, which is already in the Code of Virginia, that this can be done. As long as you have not acquired a felony conviction as of yet, you're registered to vote, or if you're not registered, you can register while you're in there and you can vote. Went up against a lot of opposition on that one as well. We even had our communications and marketing director, Mr. Pace, develop flyers such as these, which is to know your rights, which is really a simple thing that can be posted in any facility so that the inmates would know that, you can vote in an election. Again, due to the politics that be at this particular session, we didn't get this one through, but it's another one that's worthy of taking forward again in the 2020 session, should the balance of power shift again. In the meantime, it would not be a bad idea if Portsmouth was to implement this in their local jails, because we were supported by Sheriff Moore and our regional jail as well.
Thank you.
The next piece was dealing with the FOIA law and fishing expeditions, and being able to identify public employees through giving out FOIA requests. We made some good, it's about smacking. We made some good points on this. We did fight very hard for this, and we did get a letter, again, from Delegate Knight from the Rules Committee, sending it over to the FOIA Committee, advising them that they needed to look into this to make sure that the rules and regulations that's currently being promulgated are addressing that, and if not, to address it. And then, last but not least, I think, no. Then we also had this one dealing with the ERC contract, paying down the tolls until the contract can be purchased by the state. And so out of that one, that also went to the Rules Committee in the House, and Delegate Knight, who's the chair, had agreed to send a letter to the Joint Legislative Review and Audit Committee, JLOC, to possibly look at it and take it under consideration for 2020 studies. However, as you see in bold, Governor Northam added a budget amendment in his budget, which did pass, directing the Secretary of Transportation to evaluate options to mitigate the financial burden on commuting public from this contract, and to report to him back by June 30th of next year. So we did get some movement on that one as well. So all in all, I would say that Portsmouth had a pretty successful 2019 legislative session. And last but not least, we were trying to get funds. So as you remember, last session, we were the third city to have our African American historic cemeteries placed into the new registry created by the state. But we got maintenance money, but we didn't get the money for the restoration of the headstones and grave markers. So we went back this year to try to get that. Not only did we not get it, every other locality that's already on the registry that tried to get the money, they didn't get it either. But it's in the code, so we can continue going up there to ask, and eventually we just may get it. And that's the end of my portion. And at this point, Mr. Ashby, turn it over to you.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council, let me begin by saying, or making sure you're aware that Ms. Neal, through her efforts, saved a lot of our efforts in front of the committees. Her knowledge and expertise, as you could assess the room, a lot of our initiatives were headed to a very short lifespan. And through her savviness and her experience, she guided each and every piece such that we could get those issues in front of various departments so they would have a life within the department and come back again, as opposed to simply walking out of the session with nothing to show for that. So between our delegation and her efforts to navigate us through and kind of get that us through those small opportunities that were available to us to keep that issue alive and have the departments carry our issues instead of where our delegates might not have gotten it out of session. That was pretty important, and she is entitled to a great big kudos for getting that done for us on 4, 5, 6 different fronts, because we had some very challenging issues this go round. It was the short session, and so while in some respects things were moving fast and some things did not go through very fast, I have to say the General Assembly did get through a lot of information and did pass quite a bit of legislation. Tonight, there are certain areas that I'm not going to cover. I am not going to address proffers. We'll do that. I've spoken to Mr. Baldwin. We'll come back and deal with the proffer issue at a different period of time. I'm also not dealing with the taxation issues tonight because there was quite a bit of exemptions and different taxation language that was passed in the last session, and we're going to spend a little bit of time conferring with the real estate assessor and the commissioner so that we can tell you both potential impacts as well as what the legislation did, so we can have that discussion collectively, because there may be some financial impact with the laws that were passed this legislative session. And with that, let me cover a couple of highlights, some of the interesting pieces. With regard to Senate Bill 1430, the Virginia Conflict of Interest Act, those of you, the city council members, are now on alert that you must take training on the Virginia Conflict of Interest Act once every 2 years. And so that is new, and that requirement is in effect starting July 1, 2019, and you must have your training no later than December 31, 2019. As it relates to House Bill 1790, absentee voting, the change in legislation provides that if you're in line for absentee voting and the registrar's office closes, everybody that's in line is entitled to go ahead and register on that particular day. So if you're in line, we have those situations. That was not the case before. If you're in line for absentee voting and the office closed, that was the end of it. But now you can move through and vote on that particular day. Virginia law has changed on absentee voting. We now have a period of time where there is a no excuse absentee voting. So any registered voter can vote by absentee ballot starting on the second Saturday immediately preceding the election without providing any reason for making the application for absentee ballot. We did maintain absentee voting as it has been in the past for particular purposes. So now we've added one other mechanism where Virginia residents can in fact vote without a cause as an absentee voter. HB 1874, cruelty to animals. At one point under the prior law, in order to be found guilty of a felony as it relates to cruelty to an animal, it required the death of the animal. Now, any serious maiming or mutilation of cats and dogs could in fact rise to the level of a Class 6 felony. Senate Bill 1182, the Virginia Information Act, meetings held through electronic means. This year, the General Assembly passed legislation whereby if we have an emergency declared by the governor, even though the city of Portsmouth does not have a rule or a policy on electronic meetings, under those circumstances, this body could meet electronically. And by electronically, literally, it could be just a telephone conference with all parties involved. So if you have a state of emergency, the regular rules for electronic meetings are essentially suspended, and if need be, this body could gather and address its business through electronic means. Senate Bill 1431, the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, is a new requirement with regard to local government council members and the local government. You now are required to have training on the Freedom of Information Act at least once every 2 years that you are in office. That training can be provided online or by the local government attorney. That requirement does not become effective until July 2020.
Solomon, on the ethics training, is it the same alternative online or by someone like you?
I believe there is online training, conflict of interest law, Mayor.
It says online, but
It is online.
only?
No, I believe there is other means also to provide that training, so you have other options.
My colleagues, we might want to consider it
Session
as a
together.
batch, a group session.
Yeah.
Got to be by the end of this calendar year.
Yeah.
And one of the things I would suggest, Mayor, because these are every other year, it may just be prudent to have a time on the calendar to sort of remind everyone so you don't, so at least you have a tickler to decide whether this is the year you need the training or not.
With everybody's concurrence, can we ask Deborah and Solomon to work together and see if we can do a batching
Yes.
Yes.
session on both of these?
Yes.
Sure.
Paul, is that good for you? Okay. Thank you.
Annual local audits. House Bill 1866 now provides, and I believe these are one of the legislation that comes out of the Petersburg situation, where now localities are required to, of course, submit their local audit to the auditor of public accounts. If the audit is not completed as required on that particular date, the locality is required to post a statement on its website that declares the audit is pending. You have to identify the reason for the delay and the estimated date of completion. That statement also must be made at the next scheduled meeting of the governing body, and the statement will be posted, needs to be posted until the audit is complete. So that's, again, I think that's some of the improvements that have come out of several years ago when we had a significant situation in Petersburg. Senate Bill 1358 provides that any locality may establish a primary health care facility for the locality's employees and covered dependents. I think we've had a bit of this discussion and are investigating opportunities here in the city, so I thought you might want to know about that particular legislation passing. Vehicles on sidewalks, the use of power-driven mobility devices. This HB 1786 does a little bit in terms of clarifying the fact that cities can't allow other power-driven mobility devices on the sidewalk in accordance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. Of course, we know, folks have motorized chairs and wheelchairs and that sort of thing. So that piece of legislation has passed. Probably one of the trickiest ones we have coming forward is the motorized skateboard and scooter legislation. The HB 2752 went a significant way in terms of defining motorized skateboards and scooters in order to sort of define the whole area, because that is certainly an issue. Everybody's heard about the issues in Norfolk with the motorized scooters. I was in Tempe, Arizona, and they were all over the place. But with that, I'll let Mr. Baldwin update you all on where we are with regard to addressing that locally.
Thank you, Mr. Ashby. And as he indicated in that last sentence you see up there, there's the effective date of January 2020, and that is a really critical date, because if you don't take an affirmative action on protecting your right-of-way, you can give up your authority to control companies from coming in and setting up these e-scooter or e-bicycle or whatever type of program. So we're doing multiple things on this regard. Number one, we're doing research working with the city attorney's office and the city engineering department. We plan to come back certainly before that date later in the fall with, I think it'll be a resolution for council to adopt, which is going to, kind of establish the council's ability to regulate these companies. And then we will work through a process of with our consultant review. I think you're aware, Alta Planning has just started. We had the kickoff for our bike and pedestrian plan. You may recall Mr. Jackson came and gave a presentation some months ago. Part of that process for them is to take a look at our potential for either doing a bike share or regulating scooters. That'll be sort of a follow-up. We are well underway, and we will make sure that we hit this or precede the sort of the drop dead date that the General Assembly established there for January.
Any questions?
And last but certainly not least, Ms. Neal provided us an update with regard to our federal partners. The FCC is taking quite a bit of initiative, again, along this 5G line and wireless services. They are now looking at new rules, again, that would pull, essentially reduce local control over certain wireless facilities. And those rules are now currently open and up for public comment. Again, as you can see in the first paragraph, this is considered an attempt to usurp local government authority as it relates to air reception devices. That's the antennas and all the things that we have talked about in our 5G discussions. Because this matter has a June 3rd deadline for comments, we made certain we brought it to you all today to get the consensus of City Council as to whether or not members of City Council and or staff, whether you would have staff or yourselves comment on these particular rules, again, to try to maintain as much local control as we can over these devices that are likely to, permeate throughout the city of Portsmouth and have some impact on our citizenry.
I think you just summed it up. What do you all think about doing a letter that says that we discussed this and that it's council's position that as much local control be continued as possible, that we're opposed to any attempt to usurp?
Yeah.
Is that
Yes.
good? I agree.
Yes.
Okay.
Because we're not going to meet before the 3rd, are we?
No.
Yeah. Right.
No. One of the things Ms. Neal has just said, but it is probably best in this manner, as well as the letter, that you all provided, and we'll provide you the link for making public comment, that you also consider making some comment into the record by electronic means, be it at this meeting or other meetings along the way. Those things will help support your position as it relates to local control.
Well, why don't you frame up a letter that and send it by email to all of us? We can use that.
Okay. So we will provide you both a letter for your own endorsement as well as a link for you to chime in before the 3rd of June.
With a narrative that goes into the link.
Certainly.
Okay.
Okay.
And with that, I'll return it to Ms. Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Ashby, and thank you for your kind words. It would be remiss of me to not also say that we owe a huge great debt of thanks to Delegate James, former Delegate James. Him not being on appropriations at the time that we pushed through that program for the host cities of the port, along with Senator Lucas sitting in on as a budget conferee to be. And then with the support of our other delegation members, we never would have gotten that program through. So it was very fortuitous that we did it at this time. So in closing, these are the next steps for our 2020 development and your adoption of your 2020 legislative package. We'll start soliciting suggestions this month, in June and July rather. First draft will come to you in August, final draft in September. October, you'll have your joint meeting with our delegation members as usual with adoption. And that's the end of the presentation. Any questions?
I have one question. The $1 million for the host cities, is that an equitable distribution, or is it first come as needed? How do they distribute? Who's going to get what amount?
Thank you, Vice Mayor, Mayor, members of council. As I stated earlier, we are in the process of actually developing the program guidelines right now. So I just received the draft today, and we're going to be meeting on Monday to go over the draft and finalize it. But the way that they have it at this point is that the awards are going to be made on threshold basis at one grant up to $150,000 per port host community per fiscal year, with an additional pool of up to $250,000 will be available to be distributed to these projects based on a statement of need and distributed on a priority basis until the fund is depleted. All awards require at least a 1-to-1 match with the base award and potential statement of need pool funding. The maximum award per project is $300,000. Questions?
Any other questions? Sherry.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, our next item up is our Health Department update. And with us tonight is Dr. James from the Portsmouth Health Department. She's going to give a presentation on the Health Department's duties, their Healthy Connected Communities program, and will briefly discuss new Health Department initiatives.
Hi, Mayor.
Hey.
Hi, Vice Mayor. Hello, Council. Thank you for having me this afternoon. All right. So I'm Dr. James, Director of the Portsmouth Health Department. As you all know, I'm just going to briefly go through our mission and vision statement. The Health Department is committed to the promotion, protection, and preservation of a healthy and environmentally safe community. Our vision is to be recognized by the public as a leader and advocate in safeguarding the public health and the environment. What do we do? This is a very general overview, but we work with communicable disease prevention and control. We provide nutrition services. We have an emergency preparedness and response plan locally, environmental health hazard and protection program, along with health assessment, promotion, and education programs, and then medical and immunization clinical services are provided there. So recently, the Virginia County Health Rankings came out, and this is just a tally, just off the top. Where do you all think we rank? So we have a top third, a middle third, and a bottom third, and there are 133 counties total in Virginia. So who wants to go with top third?
I'll take top.
Yay, optimism. Middle third.
We got to be middle third.
Okay, bottom third. All right. So we were in the bottom third. We ranked 121 out of 133. Where do our neighbors rank? Norfolk was 93, Suffolk was 42, Virginia Beach was 23, and Chesapeake was 37. And so what factors into where you rank? So basically, they look at metrics such as health outcomes. So health outcomes are: what is the quality of life for that community? What is the life expectancy? Are there food insecurities? Health behaviors: what's the rate of obesity, hypertension, diabetes, smoking? Is it a medically underserved community? They look at those type of things. Social and economic factors: what's the level of education, the level of poverty, the level of crime, median household income? They look at those things. And physical environment, air pollution, affordable housing, water quality, that will fall into that category. So it is important that we focus on having healthy, connected communities. So our biggest thing to look at is health inequities. And health inequity is something like, for example, transportation. Do our citizens have problems getting to see providers in other cities? So by focusing on our health inequities, we can also create opportunities to be healthier. So we shouldn't look at them as negatives. And it's so important to have a healthy community, because when our community is healthy, we have improved productivity, we have increased quality of life, and longer lifespans. And this allows our citizens to fully invest more time into positive things amongst our community. So something new VDH is doing now is climate change effects. They are having their first climate change summit in June, and I will be there. I'm on the committee. And I think we all know about flooding as a coastal city. So we're just trying to engage in some other things that we worry about with the climate changing, and storm events becoming more devastating, and short-term and long-term recovery is compromised, negative impacts on fish and shellfish, negative real property values impact, saltwater intrusion into the groundwater, impaired septic system performance, and then our populations that face risk of exposure to high sustained air temperatures, poor air quality, and contaminated food. And the biggest thing we look at is our vulnerable population. So, for example, in Portsmouth, we have a lot of flooding because we're a coastal city when, the weather is bad. So our most vulnerable citizens are those people who might not have reliable transportation. So it's going to be harder for those people to get to a shelter or get out of that flood zone. So really, VDH is trying to focus on how can we support those people most at risk to have a negative outcome. So next, we have the Breast Cancer Task Force. This past January, we started this, and I don't know who remembers, but in 2012, Portsmouth had the highest rate of breast cancer mortality amongst the nation. And with all of our community partners, they got together and they did some great work. But now, based on Coleman's latest report, those numbers are trending up. So we commenced this task force. We had city representatives. Ms. Gooden was there, along with some of her staff. Bonds Accords was there. Cedar was there. Who else? We had EVMS there also, and local partners, community groups that do breast cancer support. So out of this group, which still meets quarterly, some of the goals we came up with were to expand Every Woman's Life. This is a mobile mammogram unit that is run by Cedar and EVMS, and they are going to expand the amount of mammograms they do in Portsmouth, so that's a win. And we're also going to create a community resource list so that when we have a citizen that's diagnosed with breast cancer, they'll know, okay, let me check this list. This is how I know where providers are and where I can go. And lastly, using our community health worker network to actually have someone, if a booklet isn't enough, this is a volunteer who can sit down and let you know what your biggest, what your next step needs to be. Because we noticed the big issue was coordination of care. When people are diagnosed, they might not follow up because they might be overwhelmed and not know how to get in with the oncologist or hematologist. So those are our next steps with that. All right, and what are our next steps for the health department? So we have the HIV Early Intervention Services Program, and across Hampton Roads and even the Eastern Shore, we have the highest incidence of HIV, even compared to like Northern Virginia, we're the highest. And you all know Hampton Roads versus Eastern Shore, we're so different. So it's kind of interesting how we're still lumped into that. They think it's some social determinants of health type things, but through this grant, we are participating in PrideVest, and then June 27th, which is National HIV Testing Day, we're going to be doing a health fair at Swanson Homes, offering free HIV testing, school physicals, healthy food demonstrations. So we're excited about that. Just kind of trying to engage the community and share the importance of getting tested regularly if you are high risk. Additionally, we had a new community garden open in Cross Creek and Medical Moments. So in an effort to engage our millennials on our Facebook page, we've started doing like little videos every quarter. So the one I did in February was based on like women's heart health. So just something that, keeps people looking at your site. We're just trying to engage further. And then later on this summer, we are starting the initiative Be Well at the downtown library with EVMS. They're going to have an EVMS student and a community health worker volunteer there to engage anyone who's using the library, anyone who's hanging out there, and you'll be able to check your vitals and your blood pressure, and that EVMS student can say, hey, your blood pressure looks great. This is how you keep it up. Or they can say, hey, this blood pressure doesn't look too good. I got a reference list. You can go here. This is what you can do in the meantime. So it's kind of just to add assistance. And then lastly, I don't know who's familiar, but Portsmouth Health Department, we often get like a CDC PHAB. And this is like a very competitive program. There are only 20 in the state of Virginia. And the one we got this year is Doha Medicini, and she's awesome. She is working on our community health assessment as well as our community health improvement program. And she's evaluating it and trying to make it a stronger plan. And we are applying for more, so we are very optimistic to continue to have that role at our health department. And thank you for your time. Any questions? Yes, sir. Yes, Mr.
How you doing, Dr. James?
Good to see you.
Good to see you again. I know when we had our sit down and kind of discussed healthcare and what's happening in the community, well, one of the concerns that I shared with you, and I think is ongoing, Bon Secours, I know they just closed their birthing center, And I know that there's some areas in our city that I believe are becoming healthcare deserts where folks don't have adequate access to healthcare, and that's important, as you just indicated. Is there a strategy? Are we thinking about a strategy and talking or having a conversation of those kinds of things? I know we as a city have some work to do in that regard, but I just want to make sure that we're all collaborating and talking about this before it all comes up at one point, and then we're all in a difficult situation.
That's a really good question. So Portsmouth does fit the definition of a medically underserved area, so we already are medically underserved. And basically, the Commissioner of Health in Virginia, he can do what's called medical needs necessity. So that would be the process if you need a facility. But as far as like recruiting providers, I think we just have to stay competitive with that and, you know, support our health department, not our health department, our health care system. Right. But really, the health department's role is just to kind of be supportive. So we're that partner. But I get what you're saying, and that's why we do a lot of work with EVMS and Bon Secours to keep them engaged. But I think that's a very good point you bring up. So.
Thank you. Bill?
Yes, sir.
Reference Bon Secours. We had a conversation with them at a corporate level
That we have.
recently.
Yes, we
Because
have.
closing of that birthing center is certainly not a positive for our city. And I just hope it's not a harbinger of things to come. So they need to stay on our radar screen.
This question.
Well, let's get to Paul.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I'm kind of alarmed that we're so low on the totem pole in reference to health for the state of Virginia. What plan of attack do we have in place to deal with that?
So, you know, the biggest thing we can do is partner. Because, you know, the health department can't do it alone. We can have the resources and educate people, but without partnerships, we're never going to be strong enough to change the trends. And, you know, this data isn't like 2018 data, but, you know, what I call real time. But it is significant, and we're concerned too. But, for example, like our health educators, they're like getting into the school system and doing programming. But the factors aren't just health factors now. They're economic factors.
Yeah.
So it's like partnering everyone on board. So.
Lisa?
Yeah, my question was along the same lines, the county health rankings. So the 33 in the bottom percentage, are we all conglomerated right here together, or are they sparsely?
That's a good question.
situated?
So, I'm going to try to put this in the nicest way possible. The elites, or like not the elites, the most affluent communities are at the top. So number one is Loudoun. I think Loudoun is the richest county in Virginia.
Right.
Whereas like Petersburg is kind of at our, you know, so there is a, you know, I think they're even reflecting on their process and saying that, you know, why are the most affluent communities at the top? So I think, I don't want to say there's like bias within the study, but it kind of, you know, it's obvious that some communities are more affluent than others, and that's not really, you know, on the community. You know, to me, that's not on the community, but I think it is because they take into account income. So, for example, Loudoun County has the least mortality for breast cancer.
Right.
Because if you live in Loudoun County, you're like 90% chance to be insured. You're 90% chance to have a breast cancer doctor in your city. So it's kind of a, you know, a disparity. But I think that's a good point you bring up. But I think we could look at the opportunities in the community assets. I think we have so many positives in our community. Like Mr. Baldwin was just talking about bikes. And I was blanking. Bike paths, was that it?
Bike paths.
That is a way. That is a way to improve these numbers because they look at the walkability of the community. It's not just walkability, but it's how active can people be in your community, and are they safe when they are walking and, you know, being active. So that's how you do it, by partnering and creating a program that makes your community healthier overall.
I understand the parameters involved, and I know you're at a disadvantage. no doubt that I understand that. But as the leader of the health system for the city and the citizens, I would want you to take the lead in collaborating and not merely saying that, but leading that because of the problems that we have. And doing what you and your agency can do. Preschool, attacking the elementary schools, asking the city council for more staff. We have to do something. We can't just, we have to lead. It's our problem, and I wish you would sort of look at it.
Yes, sir. And I would like to think we're taking the lead because of breast cancer.
Yes, ma'am.
That's a factor. And we have asked for more staff and supporting us. The city is supporting us.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
we've done those two things you mentioned. But I agree. We are aware of it and we are concerned. We do not take this lightly.
Yes,
We
ma'am.
do not take this lightly. I presented it to share it with you, not to put it on you, but just
I
to.
want it on me, thank you.
Well, I want us to always partner, and our city is supporting
ma'am.
us. You know, so we work. This is what we do. We're working on it 24/7.
Yes,
But
ma'am.
it does take partnerships at the end of the day. But I agree with you. Yes, sir. I respect your input. Thank you.
Other questions?
Thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, our third and final presentation item is from City Attorney Mr. Ashby. He's going to give a brief update on cemeteries. I believe this is a follow-up from your retreat in February.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, and members of City Council. Tonight, I just wanted to give a brief public update with regard to city cemeteries. As you all are no doubt aware that every so often we have an issue with regard to cemeteries and their upkeep, and there's often a discussion about various cemeteries and their condition. And tonight, for this public session, I just wanted to update you on the city cemeteries versus the private cemeteries in the area and provide you a little bit more information about what it takes to maintain those. We will certainly have an opportunity to discuss some other matters later on tonight, but I wanted to put this piece out there because so often we get requests and information about the cemeteries. The city-owned cemeteries are Cedar Grove Cemetery, Oak Grove Cemetery, Olive Branch Cemetery, and what we call the Mount Calvary Complex. Those cemeteries are set forth in the Portsmouth Municipal Code, Section 926. As you may recall from when we had this discussion in February, Cedar Grove Cemetery is at the corner of Glasgow and Fort Lane. And here's an overhead shot of that particular cemetery. Oak Grove Cemetery is at the intersection of London and Peninsula Avenue. And here's the overhead of that particular area. Olive Branch Cemetery is at Cedar Park and Clifford Street. And here's the overhead shot of that particular cemetery. And then the Mount Calvary.
Go back to that. Where is the entrance into City Park, on the far right?
I believe to the left. So there.
I think it's to the right.
Here. That's City Park Avenue.
And there's more cemetery to the right.
Certainly, that's the annex.
That's the end.
That's the annex. And we'll get to that in a second. So here's Mount Calvary Cemetery Complex. And these are the cemeteries that make up that complex from an overhead view. There are also privately owned cemeteries in the city of Portsmouth. There's the Olive Branch Annex and the Lincoln Memorial Cemetery at 3901 Deep Creek Boulevard. Here's a shot of the Olive Branch Annex and overhead. And here's a shot of the Lincoln Memorial from a street view as well as the overhead view. We talked last about a little bit about the city's responsibility in terms of maintaining good order. When we initially talked, we talked about the initial $1 million corpus for the Cemetery Trust Fund. Of course, as we reported then, and we'll have to provide you new numbers, that the treasurer has done a great job in terms of investing those funds and growing those funds so that we can use those funds for the benefit of certain capital improvements out in that area to maintain the city-owned cemeteries. When we spoke to you back in February, at that point in time, the perpetual care or maintenance budget was about $50,000, and we were looking to increase that in the upcoming years. Of course, part of that funding was used for repairing headstones, fences, and gravesite cave-ins. And that's the sort of issues more often than not that gain the attention of the public, and often is the purpose for calls that come into the city. Many times we get those calls, whether they're coming or concerns coming out of the private cemeteries or the public cemeteries, and it is only when someone reaches out to us that we can advise them one way or another whether the cemetery they're concerned with is in fact a city-owned cemetery or a private cemetery. Again, it is at that time that we let folks know what our maintenance responsibilities are. Periodically and throughout the year, Parks and Recreation Department makes a significant effort in terms of trying to maintain our city-owned grave sites in the best condition possible. When it comes to grave sites that have fallen, I spoke with Mr. Palmer-Chuck this morning. As it relates to city sites, if in fact there's just the loss of soil and that grave site collapses in, the city goes out and fills that grave site with clay, sand, and topsoil in order to replace that grave site. And the expense of that is not excessive. However, if a cave-in involves a headstone, at that point in time, the city goes out and contracts with a contractor to deal with these old gravestones because they can be quite brittle depending on their age. When that occurs, the city could end up paying between $1,000 and $3,000 to fill in those grave sites in order to get them filled in and put the gravestone back in place. So that is a significant expense to the city in terms of the cave-ins that occur. One of the things, of course, as we look forward to this process, we are constantly trying to make certain that out of the revenue generated funds and fees paid, that we can come up with the best means of maintaining both the property as well as those grave sites. And so that's the purpose of the interest and whatnot we gain off of the $1 million cemetery trust fund and the fees that we do collect. Any questions with regard to that aspect?
I think at the retreat there were a lot of questions referenced the annex and whether the questions concerning the ownership and the deed, when that was conveyed, under what circumstances it was conveyed, and whether it's taxed.
Certainly, and we have spent the time that you all allowed us to delve into those issues. We are on the cusp of coming up with a new strategy in terms of how that's dealt forward. Some of that we are going to have an opportunity to talk about offline this evening so that we can come up with the approach to address those issues. But to answer the question with regard to the annex is in private hands by deed. And we have started the process of confirming those issues and having a discussion with the relevant parties. But we will.
Put that slide back up that shows the annex.
And so, but we will, at the conclusion of this public works session, have a little bit more to talk about that and where we are.
I certainly think of that as the city cemetery. I wouldn't think that most people think that's city. That's a city cemetery.
That's an excellent point.
But you're telling us that it's private.
Correct.
About the general maintenance, grass cutting, what have you, is that a city contractor? Or is that
A good bit of that has been done by city employees.
is it being done by city employees now, or combination city employees and private contractor?
Historically, it's been done by both.
No, I'm talking about
Who pays?
No, and I'm saying throughout the history, there have been aspects that have been done by city employees, and there have been aspects that have been done by private contractors also.
As we sit here tonight, is it being done by city employees or a private contractor?
Both.
Who pays the private contractor?
In some respects, it's part of the contract that exists. So some of it is work on the private person's part, and some of it is work done by the city.
I'm concerned with Lincoln Cemetery with the inconsistencies that aren't new, inconsistencies over the years. 1 month is spotless, 9 months is atrocious. I'm hoping that we can come to some point where we can keep it consistently on the level as the city
Can
cemeteries.
you get Lincoln up there?
And I will tell you,
That picture is a reflection.
I've been out there.
I will tell you the staff had a brief meeting this morning, and we did have a discussion about enforcement actions that have had to occur in order to get Lincoln up to snuff. And you're right, staff reported the same as you did. There are periods of time where it's fine, and then there's periods of time where there has to be some city enforcement action before things are improved in terms of the short term.
Shannon, you had your hand.
So yes, to your point, so help me understand, are city cemeteries or city cemeteries in general, are they under a city code or state code for enforcement or upkeep? How does that work?
They are.
Okay.
They are. City cemeteries have less regulation because they're run by the municipality.
Sure.
Private cemeteries have more regulation.
Right. So, and you were already going that way. If there is the code, then and there's a standard, right, per the code.
Certainly.
Then there needs to be some level of enforcement and compliance with that enforcement.
Correct. Correct. And the permits and inspection department does take those issues up, and much like they do grass cutting on your yard or whatever, they do go out and move to enforce those issues when they're arise.
And last question, I needed my last question. Sure. Is there a penalty for non-compliance?
I'm not certain of the whole scheme, but I suspect it's much like the grass cutting and the other issues that exist for other properties.
Okay, thank you.
It would be good to see what those requirements are, because it pains me to drive down Deep Creek Boulevard and see water standing on many of the grave sites. That should be, if there's an ordinance against it, we need to have it enforced. That should not be.
Well, what we will do is get with the Department of Permits and Inspections and put together an array of those applicable ordinances that apply, as well as what have been the calls out to that area. And we could certainly bring you back a briefing in terms of what that scheme is.
Well, picking up on Shannon and Bill, I think it would be useful for us to know what the state requires.
Absolutely.
And if you could go to those sections and maybe develop bullet points, the state requires this, so, and show where they're out of compliance.
We can certainly do that and give you a briefing in terms of what those elements are and how they are set forth in the various codes and how they are essentially enforced.
But there is one owner for that entire cemetery. It's
I
not
believe so.
abandoned.
Correct.
So it would be useful to get those requirements so we can get the appropriate person, if it's not us, to apply.
Certainly.
Yes.
I don't know if I have the only morbid question at the table, but are the private cemeteries burying people to the same rates that the public ones are? I mean, are people choosing to, go there versus the others more? Do you have?
I can't answer that question directly, but we can do some research and try to get back with you.
Did you?
No,
All right. We're going to discuss this more.
Certainly.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're at item 4.
Right, and Mayor, I wasn't intending to read all of those to council, just point out the 4 items on the city manager report. In particular, the first item, which is the issuance and sale of general obligation bonds, not to exceed $28 million for the FY 2019 capital improvements program.
We do have our financial advisor here and our CFO. Does any member of council want to?
Yes, they're here.
Yeah. As you know, when you issue bonds, you're required to get your bonds rated, and that took place last week. Portsmouth has sent a team. I was part of that Monday and Tuesday. Any questions of the advisor or the CFO? Okay. Thank you.
And I have no report backs.
Excuse me, Mayor, if I might.
You may.
A couple of things. Mayor, Vice Mayor, and members of City Council, this morning we had a presentation in the PPIC from PER Properties, which is one of our corporate citizens that is on the cusp of beginning their concrete processing facility here in the city of Portsmouth. As you all may recall, those of you who have been here a while, PER, as part of their use permit, had a condition to provide a landscape buffer on the boundary of their particular property. It so happens that the property abuts a EPA site, and the EPA has resisted any sort of buffer, be it fence or landscaping, on the berm where they have secured some soils. And so that is for the protection of everyone involved. The issue that has come up is that PER is going to have to, if they wish to move forward and open the business as scheduled, they're going to have to come back to City Council to adjust that one provision for the landscape buffer. As you all know, that's an industrial area, and the buffer was originally supposed to be a tree or a bush that would grow in that area.
Does everybody know where we're talking about the site?
under the Jordan Bridge.
Under the Jordan Bridge, right.
Yeah.
And so staff has had certainly some interaction back and forth with the landowner in order to come up with a means by which they can address this issue, given EPA's concerns about putting that buffer up. And if it is the will of this body, I believe they are going to bring an amendment to the use permit forward to City Council and to the Planning Commission to address that buffer that they cannot put in place because of EPA's enforcement. And in the interim, the city has one or two other conditions that they are trying to resolve so that business can go forward and open.
On what basis can we issue a temporary occupancy permit?
Well, there are some conditions on that particular property that can be addressed in a short order by bonding. That bonding would allow them to, and a bond, of course, is much like insurance. It is a vehicle to secure the building of the appropriate standards, or be it landscape in this area or some other condition that the city requires. They essentially put up insurance to have that done.
And if they don't do it, we go against the bond?
Then we go against the bond if they don't meet the
Can
condition.
we do that in this case for both the?
We are certainly exploring that with them, and they seem amenable to that in order to get open in short order.
Mayor, the PPIC asked me to bring this to you all tonight.
Okay.
After a hearing from Mr. Crockett this morning, and in fact, Jim Bento, the chairman of the PPIC, is here as well to answer any questions we might have. Particularly for those of you all who were not here in 2010 when this was sold, recall that we have changed our zoning regulations 3 times since then. And at the time, we were developing the Paradise Park. We were just starting to hear from the EPA about all the terrible things in the water down there, and trees sound like a great idea, but you're between the Jordan Bridge and the Naval Shipyard, and the EPA says, no, you can't touch this. So we certainly have no authority over the EPA, but we don't want to keep the business from opening over trees, which sounds silly. So the PPIC wanted the council to know that they want this business to open. They sold them the property. They're right here at this point, and whatever we can do to get them some sort of.
I'm gonna, because we do have the chairman.
Yeah.
Chairman,
That's
come
why
to the
he's here.
lectern, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening.
Good evening.
Have we covered this subject well? Is there something that you would like to add?
I think it was covered very well. That's the basic gist of it. You know, we started in 2010. We sold the property. As you said, it's changed several times in use, and the council approved that. But at that time, when the buffer was put in place on the plans, that was just we had no idea that the EPA was going to secure that site and ask that no penetrations go through that site, whether it be trees, bushes, or fencing. So it's kind of the owner's now caught in a little bit of a quandary because he can't get his certificate of occupancy until he puts the trees in or an adjustment is made. So that's where we are.
Yeah. Well, Paul?
Are we having any federal, state, or EPA problems that will affect the city in reference to something that we might contemplate doing at this time? Are there any missing things that we're not seeing?
No, Councilman Battle, I think that the issue would be if somehow the city were to try to force this issue, because all the issues are encapsulated.
Yes, sir.
We don't want to do anything to create any kind of liability on anybody's part by trying to supersede what the EPA says needs to be done to protect the area and protect the public thereby.
I know a little bit about this because I was manager. What the EPA did was come in and made a bulkhead at the river's edge, and then they took the toxic material from the river bottom, which was primarily creosote,
Yes, sir.
and put it behind that bulkhead, and then they capped it so that rain would not get into it and move it
Yes,
through groundwater. And what it sounds like to me is that EPA has said, we don't want anything to puncture that cap,
okay.
which sounds reasonable.
So in essence, what I'm failed to get you to see my question is, if we do something at this time like approving a use permit, is there anything withstanding that we are not seeing from the EPA or federal state guidelines?
No, there's no issue for us because
Oh, okay.
we have gotten the letter from EPA that says,
So,
do not do X in this area. So we started with the letter
well,
from
I
EPA.
knew,
Yeah.
Right.
A previous council has approved the
Yes, sir.
conditional use permit, and one of the conditions can't be enforced because the EPA says you can't do it.
right,
Nobody
Yes.
could foresee that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so they're going to come back with an amendment.
We will continue to talk with the applicant, and we think we've got a means of getting that issue resolved in short order for their benefit, but also in order to make certain council has taken the appropriate actions to address that particular condition that cannot be met because of the EPA
We think.
restrictions.
we think.
No, well, in terms of it not being met, it cannot be met because the opportunities, we have provided options, but they all require some risk of puncturing.
That
So-
part I understand.
Okay.
The only thing I'm interested in is how this will affect us.
Certainly.
Will we be in code or out of code, or
Right.
is there an unforeseen law or an unforeseen situation that can hold us liable with the proceeding of this project?
No, we will notify you if we think that is an issue, but as we move forward, we're clearing all of those hurdles before this
Thank you
issue
so
gets back
much.
to you.
That owner has the patience of Job. Once again, the property was sold back in 2010. We're sitting in 2019, still discussing it.
You still want to do it?
Well, and I will say this, Councilman Moody, and Mr. Baldwin can speak to it. I was of the impression it was done back in 16 when we were discussing it.
The site plan section was approved in 2016.
I have a question, and the question is, in order to remove this particular condition, he's got to reapply for an amendment to the existing conditional use permit.
That's correct.
It's got to be heard by the planning commission and then heard by council. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. We have done this before to expedite. We've had a joint hearing with the planning commission. Is there a desire to do that? Anybody against that?
I think it has a sense of urgency at this point.
Mayor, staff did talk a little bit earlier. You do have potentially July 2 and July 8, so they fall essentially a week behind. You wouldn't have to bring everybody together, but they would fall 1 week behind each other.
Stay with me. I'm trying to get a sense of urgency from council. I sense that it's council's desire that we expedite this process, that we don't protract it. Is that correct? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
That is correct.
Yes.
To include the possibility of having a joint public hearing. And what I'm hearing too, in the interim, because you got to advertise and meet the state code requirement, do what's necessary to try to get a temporary conditional use permit tied to a bond.
Yeah, whatever you have to do
Yeah,
Is that agreeable?
to be business friendly.
Yes.
that is,
Yeah, I think the bond covers everything.
yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank council for your attention to this matter. Thank you.
One other matter, Mayor, there was a question asked about spike hedges last meeting. The city has done some research into spike hedges. Virginia does not regulate hedge height. as it does fence height. However, we have put out requests to all of the local government attorneys to see if anyone has addressed that particular issue. And for those of you who may not be aware, spike hedges are plantings where the belief is the express purpose is essentially to remove the view. It's put in place in spite of some neighbors so they cannot enjoy the view in the area. It's a very interesting part of the law where we limit fence heights. We don't necessarily limit shrubbery heights. And so it's unique. There are some states that regulate it. Virginia does not. But we are still looking to see if other localities have addressed that issue through existing law and see if we have some parallels to address that.
Okay. Very good.
Yes.
We now come to council liaison reports. We'll start with
Thank you, sir. I have a couple. For military affairs, I think you all know we had a flawless 135th annual Memorial Day parade yesterday. I'm going to thank some people in the 7 o'clock meeting, so I'll skip that for now. For the Port of Virginia today, I don't know if you saw on the news, the largest vessel to ever call in the Port of Virginia called today. It's called the Triton, and it's owned by Evergreen Shipping, and it is an ultra-large container vessel with 14,000 TEUs, and it called in Portsmouth this morning. For EDA, at the last meeting, they approved a purchase and sale agreement for 1500 High Street for the Hampton Roads Community Health Center for their new location. They also, EDA also approved an extension of the feasibility period for the purchase and sale agreement with the Miller Group for the property at 409 McLean Street from May 23rd to August 1st, so about another 60 days for them to clean up some environmental questions. A facade improvement grant for $11,464 maximum was approved for 1140 London Boulevard. And I previously mentioned to you all after the meeting that the EDA brought up conversation about remote attendance at meetings and was asking the city attorney's office, Jeff Miller in this case was there, about policies for remote attendance. Ms. Moody and I were both there, and we kind of looked at each other like, well, why would the EDA have a remote attendance policy if the city council doesn't have one? And so my question to you all to please think about before they meet again on June the 18th is, does the council have a position or desire for me to share with them that we either don't want them to pursue the idea, or gee, that's great, y'all look into it, and then we'll see whether we want to do one or not. You don't have to tell me now, but we meet again on the 18th of June.
Well, we kind of find out where we are. The state code allows for a call-in if you, under certain conditions, if you're a member of a public body, but only if that public body has taken a position that will allow that
You
type
have to
of...
have the rules in place. And I mean, this is for a vote. This is not just to call in and listen.
Yeah,
So-
we've had the call-in and listens before, but it would probably be good to see if any of the other localities address that.
That's a good point.
And I think the state's requirements are health-based. In other words, you can't physically make it to the meeting. And maybe some other, one other concern I don't recall that one. Family emergency, I
Kind of took us by
believe.
surprise, frankly.
Get a consensus to ask the city attorney to give us a report on what basis this could be done, what other localities are doing, and the advantages and disadvantages.
Yes.
Okay. Is that good?
Yes.
And for PPIC, well, you got that report, and they approved a resolution for regarding a water delivery project out in the West Norfolk industrial area this morning.
One thing, the Department of Social Services, as you are aware, had their toy drive. It was very, very successful. In fact, they have so many toys, they have to do another round of giving them away. We had a lot of support from Florida in shipping a lot of toys to us. It was a wonderful collaborative effort. Everybody seemed to have participated that was asked. So that was wonderful. And of course, you were there opening it up for us. Yes.
I attended the EDA meeting that Elizabeth did a brief on just now.
PRHA, we met with them on the 16th, May 16th, and one of their concerns is the cooperative agreement. I think I shared that with Deborah to share with all the council members before. It's a March 28, 1956 document that they're looking at. And one of their concerns is that they want to request or see if we would be interested in having a pallet of payment in lieu of taxes as part of the agreement, but this is something that they want to discuss with us when they come together for our October joint meeting. So this is an old 1956 cooperative agreement. They just want to make sure both parties are on board and compliant with what's in there. So I'm pretty sure there have been some changes. There was a resolution passed, a Moving to Work program that they have that HUD is seeking. They were allowed that designation for the Move to Work program, which provided an opportunity to design and test innovative employment opportunities for people who are in the self-sufficiency programs. That will also come with some funding. They have a agency plan that was approved for their now 2019 annual agency. It's a 45-day public comment period if anybody's interested in that. And also one big thing, the HUD capital funds, they're going to receive $1,922,459 this year from HUD. That's a $282,000 decrease, and that's because of the demolition of the Lincoln Park project that's there. There was also another concern about, well, of course, the executive director, they reviewed his contract to determine if he would, was on track with what they anticipated, and it was an automatic renewal of his contract, and some of the board members had some concern with that, but they're going to still make comments even though...
I'm not sure I understand.
Okay. Although the contract renewed automatically, some board members still have some comments that they wanted to make. One big concern that was brought up was the police community walk in Swanson and Dale's home. They said it lacked PRHA presence, so they wanted when the police department comes out to do these walks, that somebody from PRHA, whether it's the director, the deputy director, or some staff or somebody, be involved in that as well. Because of the shooting, was determined that it was a non-resident, and most of the shootings or most of the incidents or most of the break-ins or most of the anything that happened is somebody from not even in there. So they wanted to know how they manage non-residents, and of course they're looking at putting back their security officer position where they had like a stakeout house or something like that, or some other opportunity that they wanted to look at. And the last concern that was brought up to me was PRHA would like to look at, I don't know if they do this in their meeting with the city manager that they have every other week, but they want to look at a contract to have the city pick up their trash. I think they are using some other means right now, so they want to possibly look at a contract so that we could pick up their trash. So.
Bill, you got a question for Lisa?
Yeah, recently there were some highly publicized grant awards. I know the Secretary of HUD was in town. Did our Housing Authority apply for those grants?
And I don't think that they did. When I was at the Virginia First Cities, Newport News was there, and also, who was the other city that was in Norfolk was awarded, and they had their big check there. They didn't seem to, if they did, they didn't meet the criteria. It was a whole lot of criteria that you had to follow in order to even be considered, for the process. So I don't think that they were
applied.
No. And we also are waiting the end of this month if the bonds were approved for the county street. So they will let us know at the end of this month if those were awarded to the Wooder Group.
Thanks. On the trash thing, that's something that the city manager and the executive director ought to be discussing
Right.
and bring back a recommendation.
I don't have anything this evening.
I just wanted an update on the TCC board member search. I did talk today with retired Admiral Hugel, and he is going to be considering taking up that request. So we'll see how it goes.
Good. We have a need for a closed session.
I have it here. I move to go into closed meeting pursuant to Virginia Code subsection 2.2-3711A.8 for the purpose of consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by the public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel, specifically regarding cemetery ownership and maintenance, and B, pursuant to Virginia Code subsection 2.2-3711A.8 for the purpose of consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by the public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel, specifically regarding the Atlantic Union Bank Pavilion, and C, pursuant to Virginia Code subsection 2.2-3711A.3 for the purpose of discussing the acquisition and disposition of real property where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body, specifically regarding Crawford Bay.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? Madam Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Battle?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Glover?
Yes.
Mrs. Lucasberg?
Yes.
Mr. Moody?
Yes.
Ms. Simmons?
Yes.
Mayor Rowe?
Yes. We're in closed session. Those